Guys, the man of sin sat in the temple of God in 66 AD. This is also whenever Satan was cast out of heaven. 3.5 years, 1,260 days, and 42 months. This is the 3.5 year war from 66 AD to 70 AD. The man of sin was part of the people called the Zealots. They took the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast was the Passover. Whenever the Passover was given, it was given for a sign upon their hand and a memorial between their eyes. It was also said that it was given as frontlets between their eyes and binded upon their hand. They were supposed to keep the Passover until the Passover lamb fulfilled it. You can look that up in Exodus and Deuteronomy. That's before the law was given. This was what started the law, was the Passover. All right. And it was given until Christ, who was offered up on the Passover and where the temple was also destroyed on the Passover. They kept the Passover. The Christians did not keep the Passover. The Zealots sat in the temple of God and fought against the Romans, and the Romans destroyed the temple, which you can clearly see in Joel. It lists the Romans perfectly about the battle that happens on the great day of the Lord, whenever they climb the wall and scale the wall like mighty men, and they wither the grass behind them because their armies are so big, and they march in a way that they don't fall on each other or stab each other with the swords. Like, this is what Joel talks about, but if you read that, you'll see that this is the judgment of God, as the army of Rome coming and destroying the temple and the Jews. Now, if you read in history, if you read Josephus and other early writers, you'll see that it said there was actually a voice in the temple that came in 66 AD, and it said, "Get thee hence, get out of the temple." And they said that there was armies running on the clouds, and they said that you wouldn't believe it unless you were there to see it. They said it was like a thing of fiction unless you had been there to see it. That there were armies and chariots and horses running on the clouds in 66 AD. This is what Paul meant whenever he said, "He who lets now letteth until he be taken out of the way." This was God. This is God's temple. He also said the way into the holiest of all was not yet manifest while the first tabernacle was still standing. In other words, the first tabernacle had to be destroyed before they could be caught up and become New Jerusalem, and their bodies could be made the temple of God, which it shows that their bodies were the temple of God in chapter 22 of Revelation, where each cubit was the size of a man, and it made up the temple, the 144,000, 12,000 on each side. If you see, we know that Satan was cast down in 66 AD, and he started this war for the temple. How do we know he was cast down in 66 AD? Revelation chapter 12, Jesus, first Israel gave birth unto a child, and they travailed in birth and gave birth unto a child that was to rule the nations with a rod of iron. He was caught up to the throne, and then there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and Satan was cast out of heaven to the earth. When he was cast down, whenever the dragon saw that the serpent saw that he was cast down to the earth, he chased the believers, the seed of God, into the wilderness where they had a place where they would be nourished for 1,260 days from the face of the serpent. Well, there was always the glory cloud sat over the temple. This is foreign to us today. God doesn't do these types of things. Before he worked in the flesh, now he works in the spirit. But throughout the old covenant, whenever they built the tabernacle, they moved with the glory cloud. Wherever the cloud went is where they put the tabernacle, and they would sit it there however many years that cloud stayed there, and then they would move with it. And then God would come down in the glory cloud, in the clouds, and he would sit on the temple. This is Jesus Christ coming back in the glory of God in a cloud. He comes over the temple. They saw that cloud. He's coming in the clouds. Well, in 66 AD, whenever it said, "Get thee hence," the cloud that sits over top of the temple moved up into the mountains. And for 3.5 years, for 42 months, for 1,260 days, the believers went into the mountains. They fled from Judea whenever they saw the armies encamped about Israel. Look up, for your redemption draws nigh. These be the days of vengeance, whenever all things written shall be fulfilled. This is whenever he said, "Get out of Judea, flee into the mountains. Don't turn back to get your things. Get out." This is whenever they saw Jesus in the book of Revelation. The same time that Satan was cast out, the stars fell from heaven under the sixth seal. The 144,000 were sealed, and they saw Jesus on the clouds and said, "Hide us from the wrath of the Lamb," and they hid in the dens and in the rocks and the mountains. So they followed the glory cloud into the mountain, but the glory cloud left the temple, and this war started. This is the man of sin. He sat in the temple of God. If you don't think that it's the temple of God, Jesus told the Pharisees, he said, if you swear by the temple, you swear by him who sits in the temple. Once God was taken out of the way, the man of sin came and deceived them and had everybody keeping the Passover, and they rejected Christ. They said the temple would not be destroyed whenever Christ said he would destroy the temple. They said that a Messiah still had to come. They called other men the Messiah, like Simon Bar-Jorah, I think it's Bar-Jorah, I think his name is. There was many zealot leaders who they thought was the Messiah. They made money to them and everything else. They would not let any Christians in. They would kill you if you were a Christian. They would deliver you up to councils. They'd kill you if you did not keep the Passover, if you were not a Jew, if you were not a zealot, if you were not what they thought you should be. And this is the man of sin sitting in the temple of God. And then Christ destroyed the temple. What is the sign of your coming? And what is the end of the world, the end of the age? And he said that the stones, they were asking him that whenever he said that the temple would be destroyed, because they knew by the old covenant that the end of the world is the end of the Jews, the end of the temple being destroyed. And he said, not one stone in that temple would stand upon another. Whenever the armies came about Jerusalem, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. And there comes a time, like Luke said, whenever your enemies will compass you about and cast a trench around you and lay you even with the ground, and your house will be left unto you desolate. This is the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke of. Whenever you see the armies around Israel and the abomination of desolation, it's going to leave them desolate. Then get out of Judea and flee into the mountains for 1,260 days. This is the whole thing. And then whenever Christ returned and destroyed the temple, and the man of sin with the brightness of his coming and the word of his mouth, the man of sin that sat in the temple of God, because God was taken out of the way, the man of sin came, and it caused the place to be desolate. Whenever Christ returned and destroyed the temple, the dead in Christ went up and their bodies became the temple. Because whenever the first tabernacle was destroyed, then the way into the holiest of all was manifest, and they were able to go up into heaven. And this is the judgment. I probably left some stuff out, but that is a good truth for you to know. The man of sin was somebody inside the Zealots camp. And that was a terrible war and the worst tribulation that ever happened in that world.